Good evening, and welcome to an artist talk by Judith Brotman in conjunction with the exhibition Soft Allergy, currently on view at the Glass Curtain Gallery. My name is Meg Dugood, and I'm the Executive Director of the Department of Exhibition, Performing, and Student Spaces. I also have the wonderful pleasure of being the curator to this exhibition. Soft Allergy is born out of the collaboration of individual practices in a series of call and response installations where edges are present yet hard to determine. The artists in this show have pushed and pulled, upending and uplifting each other's practices. Meeting every 3 weeks over Zoom since 2020, the artists developed this show virtually by trading material and works in the mail along with toiling in their studios. The works in the show exude formal, material, and conceptual struggles of their co-creation. They are generative and intuitive, and the show is always in a state of being created. I'm going to go through a few images of the exhibition, and then I'm going to introduce Judith, who will talk for a little bit, and then you can ask questions at the end via chat or unmuting yourself. So let me just share my screen. I'm gonna make this bigger so I can see it. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of give you an overview of how it is to kind of walk through the space. Stop sharing. All right, now I'm going to introduce the star of our evening. One of three. Cameron Clayborn went last week, and Claire Ashley goes next week. Because what better thing to do in a 3-person show than have 3 separate artist talks around the same show. So Judith Brotman is a multidisciplinary artist and educator from Chicago. Her work frequently occupies the space between abstraction and figuration, deterioration and regeneration, elegance and awkwardness, generosity and obligation. She has exhibited at venues including Indiana University Northwest, Franconia Sculpture Park, Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, the Society of Arts and Crafts in Boston, as well as the Smart Museum of Art, Rush Women, Reinberg Newton Gallery, Three Walls, Slow Gallery, the Chicago Cultural Center, Tiger Strikes Asteroid, Chicago Artists Coalition, Hyde Park Art Center, and Gallery 400, all in Chicago. Brotman's work is in the collections of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, the Illinois State Museum, and the Joan Flash Artist Book Collection, as well as many other private collections. Brotman received her BFA and MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in the Department of Fiber and Materials Studies, where she currently teaches. So with that, I am going to turn my camera off and turn this over to Judith.
Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you for being our beloved curator, and thank you everyone who is here this evening. I am so appreciative of this opportunity to talk about my work, and that includes the work currently in the Glass Curtain exhibition, Soft Allergy, and this would be a good time to screen share. I could easily spend the hour talking about Soft Allergy, our exhibition, but I think it's more useful to put the work into context and talk a bit about other projects. For anyone who did not catch Cameron Clayborn's talk last week, it was fabulous. I encourage you to keep an eye out on the Glass Curtain website and listen and watch when it is uploaded, and next week to attend Claire Ashley's talk, which I'm excited for. I am starting with a very, very, very early picture of me from many years back that gives you a sense of who I was then, and in some measure gives you a small sense of who I am today. And by the way, I am not a photographer, but I am demonstrating a love of looking around at the world, of observing. But you can see I'm not exactly an invisible observer. I'm pretty present and maybe a little bit hammy, and probably continues to this day. From the time of that image till now, I loved reading. I love stories. I also like sharing my own. My work is very informed by stories, the ones I read, the ones I observe, the ones shared with me, and the ones I personally experience. My own life has often followed a very circuitous path. From the time I was quite small, even in that very first picture, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was going to be a doctor, and I had no interest in art. I went away to school, entered into a pre-med program at Brandeis, but I did not like dissecting frogs or synthesizing aspirin. And the activist spirit that I had anticipated at Brandeis University, which had been there before and now may be there again, was not there at the time I arrived. So I left school abruptly without a single clue for the future. I was very, very fortunate to end up in the fiber department at SAIC working with Ann Wilson, who I credit in extraordinarily large measure for my being an artist, for my being here today, deeply inspired by her teaching and by her work. I was a weaver for a number of years. That's where my art interests began, but I ultimately left the loom, although I took with me a great love of process. This weaving was from approximately 1987, from my undergrad years. I was inspired by reading many folk and fairy tales and thinking about a life journey or the journey home in a metaphorical sense. And that narrative concept of a journey home will reappear in my work many years later. This detail from the past weaving of a figure in a liminal space, between here and there, between past and present, you know they're going to end up somewhere, but it's not so clear where. Uncertainty as a phenomenon and how it impacts us is something I think about quite a bit. It informs my work to this day. My years at SAIC as a student in the fiber department, both when I was getting my BFA and MFA, left me very open to working as an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary artist. I'm very pleased to be teaching in the fiber department now, as I have been for a number of years. This image for my MFA show in 1994, I showed a dense wall of mixed media and altered book pages, almost textile-like. And I spent quite a number of years making these, but ultimately put them aside only to reconsider them years and years later during the pandemic. I'm only going to touch on a few projects along the way of decades and decades of work, because I do want to spend the majority of time discussing two important collaborations of 2020 and 2021. This was a project called Natural Selections, begun shortly after a rereading of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It involved my picking dead or turning leaves and altering and recombining them. I was thinking about the idea of reanimating them and thinking about the touch of arrogance involved in that thought. Dr. Victor Frankenstein from the novel was both an idealist and quite arrogant, and I suspect this may be true of some of the best doctors. And it may be true of a number of artists. But what I think is that when those two are not in very tight check, particularly the arrogance factor, something can go very, very wrong, as happened in the story of Frankenstein. I have alternated between 2 and 3D throughout the years, and that includes work I call 2.5D. This work, all sculpture, is from a solo show at Three Walls, Chicago in about 2010 called Captive Audience. All the pieces reference some combination of armor, sex toys, medical prosthetics, and other useful or usable objects. This show was the first time I was thinking about an immersive environment, and a theatrical one at that. Definitely an interest in the body or the bodily, which I am quite honestly never far from. And for me, this work, this exhibition, was filled with a dark humor. Someone once called it a dark Dr. Seussian landscape. I really like that term very much, and it might also apply to soft allergy too. New Word is a piece I've shown on several different occasions. And for each iteration, I've invented 1,000 new words, and they were written on the gallery walls. This first image is from Slow Gallery. I don't define the words, nor do I write them on the gallery walls. Someone else is always asked to transcribe them. Here, Paul Hopkin, co-director of Slow, wrote them on the walls. If you visited the gallery, you were invited to select a word to be your own and cross it off with a pencil. This was the first step in making the word your own. The premise of the project comes from a line in the Zohar, the Jewish mystical tradition, and the quote is, "I'll be following this word all the days of my life." Each of us, I think, has a core of who we are, and with our eyes open, things will open up and reveal themselves to you throughout a lifetime. On the other hand, if your eyes aren't open, you may not locate that core of being. This image is from New Word at Weinberg Newton Gallery, and here Tim Nicodemus transcribed the words. A legal contract was signed, drawn up by an attorney, that promised I wouldn't give your word to anyone else, the one you selected. The attorney added, not that I thought of it, that you couldn't sue me in regards to anything about your word. There was an element of generosity. I'm giving you a free word to call your own, but there's a kind of responsibility embedded to the person who receives it, because I'm suggesting that the search, the scrutiny is inherently meaningful. I've been told that many of my words sound a little bit like Yiddish. This is not a language I can actually speak. I know a word here and there. I've heard a lot of it over the course of a lifetime. Especially when I was a kid, my parents would speak in Yiddish if they didn't want my sisters or me to understand. Having the word sound like Yiddish is not a deliberate plan, but it's an interesting outcome that is likely to not be entirely coincidental. This next group of images is from As the Story Opens, a solo show at A&D Gallery, in which I altered every page of Homer's Odyssey and recast a female, loosely based on myself, as the main character, Odysseus, and also had the pleasure, again, of working with curator and director Meg Duguid. The alterations reference the plot without in any way being a representation of it. It was the first time I thought about the political implications of my work, and it was generated by a rereading of the Odyssey. Despite the age of the text, and it's from about 700 BC, there's an implication that power, wherever it's found, begins to corrupt, or certainly has the capability of doing so. You had to travel with the installation. You couldn't see the entire story at once. That's a reference to the act of reading or the act of living, when not everything can be seen at one time. This is another text language-based project, a series of napkins called Life in Progress. I had posted a napkin on Instagram that had the words on it, "What's next?" And people responded with things like, "Come have tea with me," or "Watch this movie." And I was actually quite a bit surprised because I personally would not respond to a question posted on a napkin on Instagram. But because of that, I started writing prompts followed by multiple choice answers, and people responded. Some of the prompts and answers were funny, others were odd, but over time, and I was posting frequently, almost daily, something emerged that was kind of dark and funny, and asserting that we have very complex and ambivalent motivations that could, in fact, change by the time you finish reading the napkin. I was pretty surprised by and really moved by people's honesty, people I knew, people I didn't know in real life. There was hardly a day I didn't get at least a few responses. I've shown these napkins quite a few different ways. On Instagram, in a terrain biennial collaboration with my friend and colleague, Bert Eisenstein. I've sold them, I've shown them as installations. I do especially like the serial nature of showing on Instagram. Much of my work actually has a serial component that unfolds over time, but I also enjoy giving them as gifts. Gift is in parentheses because I feel like it's again a gift with a potentially embedded obligation. I'm giving you a small gift with the expectation that maybe, but not certainly, you'll spend a little extra time thinking about your motivations, your ambivalence. You can see that some of the napkins are embellished, which is just a little touch of absurdity to make the napkins more decorative. The napkin series, and I refer to the ones posted on Instagram, made me wonder about the possibility of a real conversation on social media, and something I still question today. In addition to the napkins, I periodically post questions and comments written on my hand or a glove or even a leaf. Something I think about very, very often, both on and off social media, is how little we know about the person next to us. How often we greet someone with, "Hey, how are you doing?" And we don't even seem to wait for the response. I love this quote of Ocean Vuong, our "how are you" has failed us and we have to find something else. And I think my concern about this has led me to look especially for exhibitions that include a lot of conversations with the other artists, with the curator, conversations that have the capacity to shift and impact my thinking and making. A pivotal show in this regard was a two-person show with Dutz Miller called A Creep That Snakes at TSA Chicago, curated by Scott Hunter, with extraordinary assistance and support by Holly Cahill, where our work was shown in conversation with each other. My materials had grown increasingly specific, as had the titles of my works. Much of my work is quite ephemeral and likely has a limited shelf life in terms of showing and reshowing a piece. This piece is Because Certainty, Having No Tongue, Couldn't Exactly Say, sequins, beads, hot roller with price tag left on, upholstery thread, tissue with text given to me by Andre, tissue with text given to me by Jeremy, and tissues. This piece is The Ghosts from Your Past Will Be Late for Dinner, but may not be on time for other meals and activities. 2 boxes of 3-ply ultra soft Kleenex, tissue given to me by Ellen, metal movie reel given to me at a rummage sale at St. Michael's Church, Vienna, paper doilies, beads, sequins, metal, wire, thread, telephone cord, wire, paper cording, bamboo skewer, gesso. So Dude Scott and I had many, many conversations, lots of discussions on Zoom, in person, and those were profoundly impactful to the work that I made. Um, Not so much collaborative work, but the conversations we had led to changes in my work and conversations between the work at the show. 2020 and 2021 were actually the first time in my life that I've engaged in true collaboration. I do not want to imply that there is anything inherently magical or even positive about collaborating. It depends on the energy and the personality of the collaborators. I'm going to guess that there has to be something fundamental that ties them together for this to work. And I suspect there has to be a mutual trust. For me, that was a huge factor in what has gone so very right in the two collaborations I've been engaged in. For me, and I have been essentially self-isolated during COVID, collaboration was supportive, inspiring, and gave me something to react against or toward during a time when I was essentially alone. And it encouraged and provoked exploration in the best ways. The work in Soft Allergy is a combination of individual works in conversation and completely collaborative work. I do have two installations in this show, and one was begun before Soft Allergy, and I think I'm going to start there. The name of this piece is 1001 Nights, More or Less, and it's a grid of about 350 index-sized mixed media pieces, each of which contain one or more altered book pages. The title is reappropriated from the book 1001 Nights, or Tales from the Arabian Nights, a set of strange and wondrous and fantastical tales, a gathering of Middle Eastern folk tales from the 8th through 14th century. The premise is that a sultan is marrying and beheading a different wife each and every day. Finally, a very wise woman named Scheherazade marries him, knowing of his past and wanting to do something about it and stop the carnage. So each night she reads him a story and leaves off the ending. He always allows her another night until after 1001 nights he allows her to live. The books I've selected, I've been very careful in my selection. They have been books read throughout the past 55 years or more, some as recently as last year. I'm going to read you a little bit of the authors list. Aeschylus, James Baldwin, William Blake, Charlotte Bronte, Jericho Brown, Albert Camus, Julia Child, Kate Chopin, Agatha Christie, Charles Dickens, Anne Frank, Sigmund Freud, Carlos Fuentes, Atul Gawande, the Brothers Grimm, Lorraine Hansberry, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Kathy Park Hong, Adolf Hitler, Homer, Bell Hooks, Edward P. Jones, Carolyn Keene, Jhumpa Lahori, C.S. Lewis, Haruki Murakami, Pablo Neruda, Mary Shelley, Jose Saramago, David Sedaris, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Rebecca Solnit, Bram Stoker, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Ocean Vuong, Edith Wharton, Colson Whitehead, Malcolm X, and words from the Zohar, or the Book of Jewish Mysticism, or Kabbalah, among quite a few others. I very deliberately selected a range of authors whose work has inspired me, others whose work has been shockingly cruel, and others about whom I'm ambivalent. I believe we're shaped by the stories we read, the ones we hear, and the stories we live through. And I think it's an ongoing process, and that we can change, shift, reassess over time. I also think we're quite complex, that we have impulses to do good, to be generous, to care deeply for ourselves and those around us. And we sometimes have impulses that are quite the opposite. We carry ambivalence about many things. I certainly do. And I think times of uncertainty, like what we're living through, don't help and exacerbate it. I'm very interested in the decisions we make, how we make meaning, how we make commitments, and how we always have an opportunity to rethink. This project has been a profoundly important one to me. In a way, I began it as a grad student in 1994, the wall of altered mixed media book pages. But then there was not a conscious effort to think about them in a specific way. I remember thinking about how we come to know anyone or ourselves as I made these works, but that was about as far as it went. I will also say that when I began this project, 1001 Nights, more or less 4 years ago, I couldn't get it quite right. It's the longest I've ever spent on a project. During COVID, about 2 years ago, I started all over and found the means and a way to think through it. And I'm so happy to have an opportunity to show it in Soft Allergy, as well as to include in this installation materials and texts by my collaborators, by a few selected friends, by myself, and from my mother's diary from when she was 13. I can't even swear the project is done, but it's definitely come to a first stage of resolution here. I have a second installation in the exhibition called Less Than You Know and More Than You Imagine. It also has mixed media altered book pages, but has a much wider range of objects included and attached. Looking at this piece from any kind of distance, you get the appearance of something quite festive and decorative, almost like a curtain of party favors or something like that. But if you take the time to really look through, there are some darker implications. This installation, unlike 1001 Nights, has figures throughout, and many of them are in extremely uncomfortable positions and appear not remotely festive. There are broken dishes, there are things piercing other things, in contrast to bright colors and a kind of party aesthetic you see from a distance. I am in virtually all of my work very interested in what close or careful looking might reveal. So I do now want to spend really the remainder of the time talking about Soft Allergy and another collaboration I've been involved in. My collaborators in Soft Allergy are Claire Ashley and Cameron Clayborn, two extraordinary artists. We are all artists with a material sensibility, although a different one. Our work comes from what I think can be described as a personal and idiosyncratic space, not entirely, but in part. I think the three of us share a number of underlying concerns, but there are also differences in the stories we carry and where we are age-wise in life. We met on Zoom for a couple of years, every few weeks, with our curator, Meg Dugood. The conversations were positive, they were always productive. There was an incredible amount of support for each other, but there was also an understanding that we might not agree, and that was fine. We would mail each other packages of materials with really no expectation of what might be done with them. But more often than not, there would be this wonderful integration into each other's work. Here you see one of Cameron's pleather forms, a material I had never worked with, but after I got it and spent some time looking at it, it really sort of suddenly became obvious that it would be this wonderful vessel to hold altered book pages and then be crowned with one of my mother's old costume jewelry bracelets. I don't want to speak for my collaborators, but I had thought that the show would ultimately be each of our works with some collaborative moments sprinkled throughout. Keep in mind, this was during COVID. Our meetings were only on Zoom. Our installation time was partly together, but partly separately and also on Zoom. So, what was especially exciting for me when the show was completely installed and I was alone in the gallery was to walk through and see that, yes, there were moments of Claire, of Cameron, of myself, but there was also a landscape that was, in a way, different than any of us, unexpected, and I'm going to call it greater than the sum of its parts. I think the collaboration had resulted in something bigger, a tumultuous landscape that's chaotic, beautiful, disturbing, funny, delicate, aggressive. Again, I think of that dark Dr. Seussian landscape might apply. I feel pretty strongly that there are political implications of our exhibition. We live in an unbelievably divisive culture. There are people on polar opposite sides of the political, philosophical spectrum who disagree and admittedly are very, very difficult to talk to. But what troubles me greatly is that there are people with small disagreements who can barely tolerate each other. The title of our show, Soft Allergy, is a reference to what happens when we are exposed to something in small doses and then begin to build up a tolerance to it. And this got played out materially in our show. Our exhibition is, I think, a kind of metaphor for open conversations and shared stories. They can easily be messy or chaotic, but ultimately they have a capacity to transform into something new. And this, I think, is a very different paradigm. I have two spoken audio pieces in this show, the Tales 1 and the Tales 2. I'm going to read an excerpt from the Tales 1, Yes, They Could Happen to You, which you can hear as you enter the gallery. It's kind of the greeter. It gets more diffuse as you start to walk through it. And it's maybe a little bit of a prequel of what's coming. The speaker is covered with an installation, which is a collaboration between Claire and myself. And it's a 20-minute audio, and I'm just going to read you a few of the tales. The tale of the psychic banker and the pink fur-lined gloves. The tale of the ordinary lover and the resuscitated goat. The tale of the light-infused revolutionary and the arthritic drug addict. The tale of the fascinating bully and the underaged pharmacist. The tale of the violent electrician and the rancid buttermilk. The tale of the waterlogged exorcist and the intransigent electrician. The tale of the fragile hoarder and the lovesick astronaut. The tale of the eccentric paraplegic and the narcissistic beast. The tale of the flirtatious crack dealer and the petite robot. The tale of the otherworldly urologist and the vicious mountain range. These tales are very obliquely inspired by the original 1001 Nights, Tales from the Arabian Nights, those strange, wondrous, ordinary, extraordinary tales. Obviously, what I've written sounds like very random pairings, and of course they are, but at least in my life often brings us almost as strange and random events and circumstances in any given year, month, or day. Cameron, Claire, and I had a second opportunity to collaborate at SAIC Galleries, working with the amazing Trevor Martin. This show was called Tender Irritant. It's something of a response to soft allergy. Cameron showed a video. One of my audio pieces is there, along with a few of my altered book pages. But the majority of the show is two of Claire's inflatables, which are adorned, or the word Claire has used that I love is festooned with or by Cameron's and my work. It appears to be something of a gentler show. It's a little bit more restrained than Soft Allergy. It's still odd and wacky and curious and strange, but it's as if the initial allergic reaction resulted in something calmer, more subdued, a little less chaotic. And I like the implications of that too, almost as if the Benadryl set in. Now I want to talk about a different collaboration that I've been working on this year since June of 2021. And this one began as part of the Terrain Biennial, but has just continued to grow and grow since that time. Kurt Peterson and Ella Witt are two SAIC alum who live and work in Depok, Indonesia, in a space called Rumah Tangga. It's their home, but it's also an artist residency, a museum, their workspace, a library, an exhibition space. Kurt was an absolutely extraordinary former student of mine, maybe about 10 years ago. And when the Terrain Biennial announced that this year's theme was called Keeping in Touch, I had this idea to reach out to Kurt, who I hadn't been in touch with in years and I was missing. It started out with a very brief email. I have a history of writing those brief messages or texts on plants. You saw them on hands and gloves. And I asked Kurt if he and Ella might transcribe a few words onto their leaves. And of course, the leaves in Indonesia are huge and amazing and extraordinary. And I thought this is going to be a really fun, quick Terrain Biennial project. But then we decided to meet on Zoom, and it was really pretty wonderful reconnecting with Kurt and getting to know Ella, who I had only met once in Chicago. And they began to share images of the leaves and grasses and their uses. Some were food, some were medicinal, some were poisonous. They would send me short stories, different texts. We spoke every couple weeks. And suddenly I had a very, very different idea of what I would write. And this evolved into a project called Message in a Bottle, a 3-part opera for the foliage of Rumah Tangga, in which I asked Kurt and Ella to transcribe and perform on and to their leaves. So this had suddenly become a very different, a much larger project. Part 1 of the opera is called A Short Memoir of My Life as Defined by the Water, and a final love letter to my mother. This is a very personal piece about my mother's and my shared love of swimming in the water and our relationship to each other. It's a piece about love and loss and those things and people that are transformative in our lives. There were 12 short bullet points to the memoir that I asked Ella and Kurt to transcribe, and I'm going to read you a few of them. 1, I feel an exquisite sensation of freedom in a swimming pool. Despite deep fondness for other bodies of water, nothing else is quite the same for me. My mother also loved the water, especially the ocean. Her rare family excursions to Coney Island Beach in the summer during the 1920s and 30s were among my mother's happiest memories. Money was scarce, and the treats purchased and eaten at the beach were never forgotten. They sounded quite unappetizing to my childhood brain. To my mother, they were delicacies. I have pool friends, people I only know from and at the swimming pool. When we see each other at the grocery store, the standard funny to us only line is, wow, I've never seen you in clothes before. My pool friends and I share an indefinable connection to the water. Some describe the water as delicious. Others say it's refreshing. Someone just today called the water her church. None of these provide an exact definition for me. I don't have a definition. In the water, I am not me and the most me. There are no divisions between the physical, the spiritual, the intellectual, between good and bad, between life and death. I find answers in the water. They evaporate within 15 minutes of leaving the pool, and I return the next day to find them again. I'm a slow swimmer, but swim continuously for about an hour. I'm sometimes stopped by someone, typically an old man, who wants to help me improve my stroke. I don't accept the offer. I have no wish to do better while in the water. In this space, I am content as I am. I believe pool water is blue. I should know better by now. Part 2 of the opera, Dreams for the Leaves, is much more experimental and much more like my usual writing. So part 2, project 2 of the opera is The Lost and Found Dreams of Rumatanga. The leaves of Rumatanga awoke one morning to discover that miraculously, each of them had a dream the previous night at precisely 3:01 a.m. They subsequently met the following night at 8:54 p.m. to share their ordinary and extraordinary night visions. Here's a sampling of the dreams that were shared. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was here. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was you. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was withered. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was poisoned. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was a celebrity with millions of fans. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was having your baby or something similar. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was eaten by an aphid. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I fell. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was usurped. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed I was alluring. At 3:01 a.m., I told you to fuck off. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed there was more to say. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed you cared more than I do. At 3:01 a.m., I dreamed there was more than this. Part 3 of the opera, Words Spoken to the Leaves, and the title is The Leaves May Die, or I May Die, or The Leaves May Talk. And here I invented 18 new words, but instead of them being for people to select, these words were to be spoken to the leaves in hopes that potentially there might be some response. I use the number 18 repeatedly in this project, 18 words, 18 different leaves, as it's a number in the Jewish mystical tradition that is associated with life and considered a lucky number. So I made these videos, 18 of them, dressed in a different floral print for each, and in turn, Kurt and Ella spoke these words to the leaves. Do I really expect the leaves to understand or let alone respond? I typically think of it more of a symbolic gesture about our interconnectedness rather than our sameness. I know there's been some studies about plants responding to the human voice. I don't claim to know why or even if, but I've read vibrations or singing can have an impact. I'm going to play one video to the leaves. The following new words are to be spoken to banana trees, kohan pisang. I will say each word twice. 1. Sufnath. Sufnath. 2. Urfra. Urfra. 3. Ankareta. Ankareta. 4. NNN. NNN. 5. Achnat. Achnat. 6. Savem. Savem. 7. Diaposit. Diaposit. 8. Gapesit. Gapesit. 9. Pratax. Pratax. 10. Chrysopander. Chrysopander. 11. Norput. Norput. 12. Galangahach.
Galangahach. 13, Mazadonket, Mazadonket. 14, Insep marked, Insep marked. 15, Bensak, Bensak. 16, Aminicher, Aminicher. 17, Pertimlat, Pertimlat. 18, Pertim, Pertim.
There have been some overlaps in how I think about my collaborations with Cameron and Claire and Kurt and Ella, but there have also been some differences. With both, there have been Zooms, so the use of technology is an interesting connection. Also, I did not know Cameron, I'd never met him, and I'd only met Ella once. And so I have literally gotten to know two of my collaborators through Zoom. And both of these relationships have felt and feel unusually deep, which is not how we typically think of Zoom. Everybody hates it. Sometimes I hate it. Certainly not always. But what's been extraordinary is that these have felt like real friendships in my life of a kind of a type that are now part of my life beyond any collaboration. Some differences. All of my writing has been done here in Chicago on my laptop for the opera. I've not made anything by hand, which is kind of a first for me. All the texts were then sent via email to Ella and Kurt, which they then transcribed by hand onto their leaves, a very intimate and laborious process. Their transcriptions truly turned my writing into something else. There's a poetry in what they've done. There's an exquisite translation. And as in all wonderful translations, their voices become present. I also want to mention in the opera, the documentation by Rumatanga's documentarian Patar Pribadi has been pretty amazing, and I think of him as yet another one of our collaborators. Also, the water has played a role in our Rumatanga opera, particularly my daily outdoor swims. So I'm used to being a daily swimmer. In the summer, I love to swim outside, and it played a very odd and integral part in the process, in that every single idea, including first reaching out to Kurt, came to me while swimming. Every single text piece came to me while swimming. And so I began to trust that the water and swimming was a phenomenon that I would accept as integral to the process of writing. So there's this virtual, non-virtual component, there's land and water. Some of the opera is some of the most personal writing I've ever done, including connections to family, grief, mourning, tragedy, and a sense of renewal. There will be an exhibition at Rumatanga in March. We're in the process of making a book with texts, an essay by a brilliant writer, curator, Sarah Skaggs, and documentation of the process. And we're all very excited. There will also be works of Ella's, of Kurt's, collaborative works of mine, and as I said, completely collaborative works. One of my biggest takes on our opera project has been its resistance to binary ways of thinking. There's a camp that says we are all one humanity, that there's no substantial difference between any of us. There's no difference. There's another camp that says bridging the difference is not possible whatsoever. Not only is difference real, but no one can bridge it. When I was very young, there was an exhibition at MoMA. The exhibition actually predated me, but it was called The Family of Man. And I remember my family had the catalog. Many of the photographs were really quite beautiful, but it promoted the idea that we are all one, and it typically promoted that from an American perspective. I increasingly feel we live in a culture that thinks that difference cannot be understood from without. And our differences in this project at Rumatanga, cultural, age, across time and place, people that even predate me, our differences have been substantial. The project begins with what is a bit of a memorial to relatives who have passed away, a celebration of swimming and to relationships, part one of the opera. And I'm asking Kurt and Ella to transcribe these words onto living entities, leaves on their land which has been in Ella's family for many, many years. And right there, I think something rather profound happened. In the process of all this, there were conversations and emails that were funny, serious. There were Zooms where I laughed and cried, and we shared family stories that were intimate, poignant, joyful, sad, inspiring. When all is said and done, I can't say I now understand Indonesian culture. In some small measure, a bit more than before, and I'm so very grateful for that. I can't say Kurt and Ella know my family, that my history is the same as theirs, but they listened, each and both, and I've listened, and our boundaries have expanded, our stories have expanded. There've been many moments where our connections and overlaps have felt incredibly expansive, but no, we're not the same, and no, we're not wholly other. And to me, it feels dangerous to need to embrace one entirely at the expense of the other. My perspective is that complexity, nuance, and certainty, and the capacity to transform are part of the human experience. And that last part I see as having political implications. There are questions embedded that I can perhaps best contemplate from my own perspective. Do I think that my life experiences, history, can be understood by someone different than I am? Do I think a non-Jew can understand my history? Do I think a man can understand the lived life of a woman? Can someone young understand the aging process or what it's like to be a caregiver to a parent who's declining? My personal answer is not completely, but I think the question is, the essential question is, how deeply can we listen to the intricacies of someone else's experiences? Can we suspend the need to talk back and just listen? Not always agree, but hold the space. And I believe this has enormous implications for our personal and professional relationships, and additionally, huge implications for those around us with different backgrounds, stories, and lived lives. With Cameron and Claire, this conversation was played out materially. With Ella and Kurt, much more text-based, and the exchange went from the literal and deeply personal to the more abstract, symbolic, experimental. I just have a few more images. This last one is an image by Marcel Duchamp. I only just discovered it recently and I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's called Door as a Substitute for Two Doors. Like much of Duchamp's work, I feel like it could have been made today and still resonates. I think of it as an act of creativity and an act of courage to see both doors. There's a wish, which I understand well, to only see one door or the other. Holding both doors simultaneously is an effort. It's an effort in life and art to live with uncertainty and complexity and hold the space in between. I too very often want to know now, is it this or is it that? I want to know. But I continue to find that meaning and excitement and the deepest complexity is most often found in the both. The final two images are actually extremely new. when I started preparing this talk quite some time ago, and I actually started with that initial photograph of me as a kid with a camera. And oddly, and maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not, all I've been doing lately is taking selfies. And I don't do photography much. I'm not a photographer, and nothing has surprised me more than to be doing this. The one on the left is called Selfie Wearing My Mother's Sweatshirt While Embracing Brooke and Imagining I'm Pygmalion. The one on the right is called First Selfie of the Year, Wearing my mother's, father's, and my old glasses, trying to see the world anew, but blinded in part by the past. Oddly, most of my new work, very much experimental right now, has been selfies in which I'm wearing clothes or jewelry that used to be my mother's or someone else in my family. I keep saying this, and I'll repeat it, I'm not a photographer, but I'm clearly thinking through stories, history, identity in this way. It's important to share, especially because some of my amazing students are here. These selfies make me extremely uncomfortable. I am not sure of what the content is or where I'm going. I find them somewhat unsettling. And they may not look unsettling, but they are to me. And this is precisely the space I think an artist should be aiming for, and to have faith that working in this way will lead us to where we're going. I can say beyond any shadow of a doubt that my two collaborations of this past year or two have made me feel more open and braver to different kinds of works. And I know that's what's led me to these selfies. So I'm tinkering in the studio with objects, but quite honestly, the only thing calling me are these selfies. I'm also uncharacteristically slowing down a little bit in the studio to think, to look, to engage with stories around me, and hopefully to engage with both of Duchamp's doors simultaneously. Thank you all so very much for being here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Judith. All right, do we have any questions? You can pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself.
Come on.
Well, if nobody else has it, if I can unmute myself. It's less of a question and more of a observation, but I don't know why I hadn't thought of this when we were installing in the gallery and the multiple times I've seen the show. But I realized that each of the index cards are like a letter in a larger sentence or paragraph. And I'm now seeing the selfies that you've been doing recently as another form of fragment of a history, right? Fragment of a sentence that I'm interested in how they are photographic sentences in a larger biography somehow. They're pretty much all items of clothing or relationships to your mom, right?
Or other family members.
Our family members, right? So I'm loving this idea of yeah, and you talked about seriality in your work, and I think that sort of sense of the selfie as this sort of cataloging somehow.
Well, first of all, huge thanks, because as I said, these make me uncomfortable, and now you've given me a little more clue of where I'm going. And you're absolutely right. This is how I work in general. I produce little fragments over time, and then typically it's those fragments that lead to the sentence and the paragraph and the story. So I'm just trusting that I do not, there came a point with 1001 Nights where I knew where I was headed that I have not reached. And that's, you know, that's the excitement and the anxiety both, as all of us know with our artwork.
Hells yeah.
Hello, Renee. It is great to see you. Do I have a substitute for outdoor swimming in the winter? That is a great question. I started venturing. First of all, my outdoor pool is the next thing to ecstasy. I love swimming in any pool, but there's no pool that gives me visions like the outdoor one. So for a little while, when COVID started dying down, I was tiptoeing back inside. And then Omicron came and I am back. I'm back not swimming again. I dream of it. I imagine it. I think about it all the time. Low impact cardio in my home is sort of a sweet stress buster, but it is not quite outdoors. My outdoor pool will open in 3.5 months, although I am not counting. Is there something that prompts me in different ways? Reading is a huge, huge inspiration to me. And stories that people share with me are totally, they go through my brain and inspire much of what I do. Very little of what I do is purely fiction or purely factual. There's always a little both in almost everything I do. Thanks for that question, Renee, and thanks for wishing me a swim. Did the leaves sing back? I think Kurt and Ella will have to answer that question. Are Kurt and Ella here? They are not. I would say, since they are not here.
We are.
They are here.
We're here.
Okay, then the answer to that question so far, did the leaves sing back?
I think it's a very slow process of observing. This whole project has been a very slow process of observing how it responds. One of the sort of constant concepts that we work with at Rumatanga is land literacy. And that can be taken in any sense, from, you know, I mean, creating new mythologies here, or, you know, understanding the more botanist perspective or scientific perspective. In the case of, you know, transcribing the dreams and Judith's memoirs, it took almost a very cheeky form, which is very Judith, of course. This to be land literacy, that this is almost a form of publishing, an ephemeral form of publishing. I think the way that we talk about it here is these things are, when you really read through the dreams, I mean, we've both read them, I don't know, countless times, and new things keep occurring. I keep realizing what is really being said in those dreams. And I mean, from my perspective, I really do believe that they are singing back but the manner in which this is playing out or will play out and how it all comes together, I think it's like Judith's words have, you know, through rain, through decay, joined the land. And there's such a complex network of time and space, thought, concept, philosophy, humor, absurdity, that I think Judith's really her thoughts, just for all of that to soak into the land. If the leaves are singing now, there's perhaps a strange discordance which is turning itself into, I suppose, a more fully composed song of its own, but the land is still digesting.
Thanks a million, Kurt and Ella, for being here. I must say, the two people who are here at the strangest time, because it's 13 hours later in Indonesia. Thank you. And also, I just want to say, we have a sort of similar mindset that there's a metaphor component of what it means to sing. And I think we all kind of believe in that. And certainly because the leaves are living entities, there will be some kind of transformation or change that occurs. So thank you, Kate, for that question. And thank you, Kate, for being here. And Faye, do you think you may play around with integrating a kind of language in your photographic work as you continue with it, with a thread of fiction or memoir or something else entirely? Thanks, Faye. It's not planned. My writing sort of spontaneously jumps up and is there. My working process, I can work at any time, but the writing seems to have, I know it will return to me. I rarely force the writing, but I am relatively confident that it will return. Meg is laughing because she and I had the first experience with my writing and she trusted it. And that is what made it kept spreading. So yes, I'm sure there will be a return of the memoir, writing, fiction, nonfiction. Hi, hello, Elflin. When you do book-related projects, what attracts you the most to the pages for what you chose as part of them? So I would say they are books that had some kind of significant impact on me, either extremely inspiring, which is my usual, or in a few cases in 1001 Nights, something that impacted me very badly and was painful or disturbing. And then there were a few that I read and reread over time that I felt quite a bit of ambivalence about. Thank you for that question. Kennedy, hi Kennedy. You say that collaboration with other artists is a new practice. Oh, but a lot of your work references stories and literature. Do you think about your more referential work as a collaboration? I absolutely, absolutely do. I always think I'm collaborating with my materials. And with books, there's an author. So I guess there is an actual human presence. But yes, I do think of that as very, very much part of the process. I guess these are my first collaborations with human beings who are speaking back to me. Hi, Nayla. My pleasure. Thank you for being here. I think there's going to be a recording of all of these, Meg.
So I just responded, and then I was in the middle of the second set of response. So we'll have the recording available in the coming weeks, and it is on the DEPS YouTube page. We link it to our website, but we also, as a courtesy, send it to all registered folks via the Eventbrite. For those who didn't realize it was in the wrong time zone, or just couldn't make it, or want to share it with classes. So you can look out in your emails if you kind of came through Eventbrite. And then of course, Judith will also have the recording, and she is not shy with links.
Oh, I'm pretty shy. I don't know that I can say anything else beyond that would have credibility. So.
I have a quick question. This is Sarah Skaggs. Hi,
Oh,
Judith.
hi, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this. It's been a treat. I feel like I've come recently to be very hyper aware that there are more things I want to read than I will probably be able to read in my lifetime. And I know you're a very prolific reader, and we talk about reading and books and all of these things. And I'm curious how you decide what to read next, or if you make a decision about what you read. And that is my question. Thanks.
How I actually decide what to read next?
Right. Yeah. Or does it just appear, and I'm curious about that.
Well, yeah, I read a lot of reviews, and I take recommendations. I get a lot of wonderful recommendations. But as in life, I think sometimes the very best reads are the surprises, the ones you start to read and it's suddenly life-changing and you never saw it coming. Anyone is welcome to share book recommendations. I love that. But the ones that change everything tend to be a surprise that I just picked up.
Right. Wait, did someone just unmute themselves, or was that you, Judith?
That might have been me.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap this up about now. The exhibition is open through February 18th. I put the links a little earlier on the chat. And then Claire Ashley's artist talk is this time next week. We would really like to see you all back here to hear another perspective on the show and kind of the bodies of work that went into the show. Please come in. The gallery has been open for a little while. We're open, no reservation. You can just sign in at security and walk on in. We will have a forthcoming catalog with an essay by Jericho Brown. And I want to say thank you very much, Judith, for sharing such amazing things and going so far back.
Very far back. Thank you, all of you, for being here. It was just a joy and a treat to have an opportunity to share this with everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Meg.